Mr. Rucker, how are you?
Thank you.
All right, you ready?
Yep.
Hello, Mr.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Your Honor, given that we have to finish Mr. Dickerson, and that the state has one more witness, and then arguing directed verdict motions, we'd like to propose letting the jury go home for the day after the state rests. And the reason I bring that up now is if the court says that's okay, I have a witness here, I'd like to release it as a 2-hour drive back to where he's going.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up because I wanted to ask whether we could instead, assuming the state rests after Dr. Heninger, I just don't think could be a real long witness. And we're down to brief redirect of Mr. Dickerson and then any questions from the jurors. If after the state rests, you all preserve your motions, but I don't have a written motion for counts 1 through 4. That doesn't mean you don't have a motion, but that's one that I think we need to handle before you continue on. Should you make any presentation, I think that I could manage that one pretty efficiently. This one, I think merits more discussion, but I don't know that unless your first witness has to deal with counts 5, 6, and 7, it seems like we could hear from that witness so he or she doesn't have to drive back 2 hours again. And we still might end a little early, but we get another witness under our belt, and then we argue the written. So we would argue 1 through 4 while the jury takes a surprise, unexpected, early afternoon break. And then we would defer the argument on 5, 6, and 7 until after at least your one witness, if not, I heard you might have 2. But
You got a slew here, but
Yeah, but we were...
we will send the rest home.
don't send them all home. Unless those witnesses relate to 5, 6, and 7, my counter proposal is we may end a little early, but let's get some more witnesses under our belt before we tell the jurors that you go home.
Okay.
Okay, does that work? All right, anything else from the defense? No. Okay. If you all can get Mr. Dickerson, and let's bring the jurors in, please.
All rise for the jurors. Our jurors are present and accounted for, Judge.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy. You all can be seated. Hope you guys enjoyed your bonus lunch break. I did not enjoy the meeting that I had to run, but it's over with, and we made some progress. We left off with Mr. Dickerson under oath. He's still under oath. Mr. Samuel had completed his cross-examination, but I want to, if you felt like you were ending early and you have other questions you want with Mr. Dickerson, here you go. No. Okay.
Appreciate the offer.
You're welcome. Mr. Rucker, do you have any redirect of Mr. Dickerson?
Yes, sir. And good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Counsel. On cross-examination, Mr. Dixon, you were asked a question about what the defendant told you happened the night that Diane McIver was actually shot. You recall some of those questions?
Yes.
And this is what I wanted to ask you. Did you testify earlier that the defendant told you that he was fearful once the vehicle exited on the Edgewood?
Yes. That he, I remember, I think that he said that there were people milling around, and he told the ladies that was getting up at that exit was not a good idea.
Okay. Did he tell you that that is what prompted him to ask for the gun?
Yes.
And did he tell you where on Edgewood that this would have occurred?
Edgewood was never specified in our conversations.
Okay. But did you testify on cross that the defendant told you that he fell asleep at some point once he reached the Georgia State University campus?
Yeah, once he felt that whatever the threat was gone.
You recall him saying that to you?
Yes.
Okay. And are you familiar enough with the downtown Atlanta area to know how far Edgewood is from Piedmont and the Georgia State University campus?
Yes, sir.
How close or far would you say it is?
Certainly less than a half a mile.
Okay. And during your conversations, however many you had with the defendant, can you tell the jurors, did he ever explain to you how it is that he fell asleep, like after only having gone a half a mile?
No. He did not.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors what type of phone did you have at the time that you would have made the phone calls to Mr. McIver as well as the text messages to Mr. Howard?
An iPhone?
Okay. You were asked a question on cross-examination about whether or not the defendant hired you because you knew Paul Howard. You recall being asked that?
I do.
Would you agree with that statement?
That was his reason for hiring me?
Yes, sir.
I think that was one of the factors, yes.
You recall being asked a question about public perception, and you thought that it was paramount how people viewed him. You recall saying that?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jury, in your conversations with the defendant, did he also appear to be concerned about his public perception and how people viewed him?
I think that he was concerned that people were rushing to conclusions or being prejudicial, yes.
I think what you told the jurors is that a success fee is not unusual in your business.
Correct.
Okay. Can you answer this question, sir? Could you tell the jurors, is asking you to share your success fee with an elected public official like Mr. Howard unusual?
It's unheard of.
Say it again.
It's unheard of.
Unheard of. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all my questions, Judge.
Okay, just one follow-up. The hypothetical aside, what was said to you is if you want to share the success fee, you can.
That's correct.
That's all.
Okay, questions from the jurors for Mr. Dickerson? Deputy Murphy will collect those. Do you know if it is illegal for an attorney or a defendant to contact the district attorney?
I do not.
Correct. Did you make any media statements or releases to the media on behalf of Mr. McIver when you were working for him?
Yes, I did.
Tell the jurors what it was specifically that Mr. McIver said to you that left you with this distinct impression that he was talking about sharing the success fee with Paul Howard, the district attorney, and not someone else, like other media consultants.
Specifically, I believe that his words were, it would be okay with me if you share it. And because the only person that I had proposed reaching out to was the district attorney himself. That was the only conclusion that I was left to draw. I did not offer to reach out to any other official in the district attorney's office or elsewhere. only to Mr. Howard.
Do you know the date that you would have put together the draft agreement between Dickerson Communication and Diane MacGyver's estate? Defense Exhibit 14, it's the one that wasn't signed.
Probably within 60 days or so of the first agreement being signed on January 3rd.
So it followed,
Yes,
it was subsequent to?
it was subsequent to, yes.
All right. And do you know if you had already begun receiving checks drawn from the estate of Diane MacGyver account? If you had already begun getting checks from that account before you presented that draft agreement that was never signed?
Yes,
You had already begun?
yes.
Okay. Do you recall the total amount, money that was paid to Dickerson Communications for the work that you did for Mr. MacGyver?
I don't recall the total amount. I think that there were 8 payments, if I'm not mistaken, of $3,000, so that would have been $24,000, and then the retainer, which would have been either the amount stated in the agreement, $7,500, or some lesser amount of around $5,000 or so.
Do you recall what account the check was drawn from that paid that initial retainer, whatever size it was?
I do not believe that it was the estate account, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Mr. Rucker, do you have any follow-up for Mr. Dickerson?
No, sir.
Mr. Sandy? Okay. Mr. Dickerson, thank you for your time. You're free to go. Next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would request that you publish a stipulation for jurors.
Okay. I will do that if you bring me the stipulation, and if I could see Mr. Harvey up here with Ms. Convery. Ladies and gentlemen, you would like me to publish the stipulation now? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, there's another stipulation signed by an attorney for the state, an attorney for the defendant, and initialed by the defendant, and the parties, the state and the defendant, stipulate the following. On December 24, 2016, Sheriff Sills went to 603 P Ridge Road, Eatonton, Georgia, to collect firearms from the defendant's property. Sheriff Sills drove to the P Ridge Road address and collected all the weapons at the address, except for the 3 that were mounted on the wall in the saloon, which he came back for on a later date. The second set of 4 guns came from Javier Hernandez, who also had guns that belonged to the defendant. A total of 4 firearms, 3 handguns, and 1 shotgun were received from investigator Richard Hyde, seated over there, that belonged to the defendant as well. Those firearms were turned over to investigator Hyde by Miss Jamie Calhoun after being removed from the defendant's Kingsborough address. All 40 of the weapons from all these locations combined were turned over after collection to the custody of the district attorney's office. This was signed and dated today, April 10, 2018. I will make this a court's exhibit, and it will be part of the record. Next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Dr. Michael Heninger.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes.
Yes, sir, you will. Have a seat, doctor. Please get as close to the mic as you can. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
Okay. My name is Dr. Michael Heninger, and it's spelled M-I-C-H-A-E-L and then H-E-M-I-N-G-E-R.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jurors by restating your name and tell them how you are currently employed?
Okay, my name is Dr. Michael Heninger, and I'm employed as a forensic pathologist at the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what is a forensic pathologist?
Okay, a forensic pathologist is a physician who practices the subspecialty in medicine of forensic pathology. And forensic pathology is a specialty that is interested in death investigation. And pathology is a general specialty that is interested in the physical structure and the appearance of diseases and injuries. And forensic means of interest to the courts. And so we're usually involved in death investigation and bringing the tools of pathology to that arena.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors how long have you been employed with the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office?
I started in July of 1995. So almost 23 years coming up.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors a little bit about your educational background and training that allows you to perform your duties at the Medical Examiner's Office?
Okay, I started out, I went to college at Utah State University. I received a Bachelor of Science degree in biology. And then I went to medical school at the University of Utah and received an MD degree. After that, I went into the military and I did a one-year internship in internal medicine at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi. And I practiced primary care medicine for a few years at the same place to pay my time back to the military. After that, I went back to Utah, University of Utah, and did a 4-year residency in clinical and anatomic pathology. And then I did a 1-year fellowship in forensic pathology in Minnesota up at Hennepin County, which is Hennepin. And that's the county that Minneapolis is in. So I spent a year there doing forensic pathology fellowship. And then I moved to Atlanta and began my practice here.
Okay. And you used a couple of terms. Can you tell the jurors what is clinical pathology and what was the other one?
Anatomic.
Anatomic.
Okay, those are the foundations for the forensic pathology. Basically, forensic pathology borrows the tools from those foundational specialties. So anatomic and clinical pathology are two of the branches of what people study to become pathologists who work in hospitals or manage laboratories. And so anatomic pathology, they often look at tissues under the microscope and make diagnoses of biopsies and other organs. And clinical pathology is really interested in the management of laboratories. And so I spent 4 years studying those fields as a foundation for the forensic aspect of it, and that's the typical course for forensic pathologists.
Okay. And are you board certified?
Yes.
And could you explain that to the jurors?
Okay, I'm board certified in anatomic and clinical pathology, and also forensic pathology. And what board certification means is that you have to complete a designated series of rotations in different aspects for a certain number of months. In this case, it's 4 years. And then you have to also pass the written exams that are more than a day long. They're quite difficult. And if you complete all of the training satisfactorily and satisfactorily pass the examination, then you're considered board certified. So I had to do that for anatomic and clinical pathology, and I also had to do that for forensic pathology to get board certified in it.
Okay. And are you a licensed medical doctor here in the state of Georgia?
Yes.
And can you share with the jurors, do you have a ballpark figure for the number of autopsies that you have either directly performed or participated in?
Directly performed, I've kind of lost count. I do, over the course of my career, I've done at least 250 autopsies each year for most years. So over 20 years, that would be over 5,000 that I've actually performed. And then we review each other's cases, and I have 4 or 5 partners, that I've worked with, and so you can multiply that, by 4 or 5. for cases I've kind of reviewed or been, knew about.
Okay. And have you ever been qualified as an expert in the area of forensic pathology in Georgia courts?
Yes, I have,
And how about Fulton County courts?
many times.
And can you give the jurors some idea of the number of times you've been qualified to testify as an expert in forensic pathology?
I completely lost track. Seems like I'm over here a few times every month for many years. So it's a lot of times.
Okay. And did you perform the autopsy with respect to Ms. Diane Mciver in this case?
This autopsy was performed by me and also another physician who we were training. He was doing his fellowship. So it was done. I did the autopsy and I was in charge of the autopsy, but he was also involved with it as a teaching situation.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to tender Dr. Michael Heninger as an expert in the area of forensic pathology.
Mr. Harvey, any objection to that? All right, Dr. Heninger, you are once again qualified as an expert, this time for the case of State versus Mciver in the field of forensic pathology.
Dr. Heninger, can you tell the jurors, kind of in simple terms, what is an autopsy?
Okay, an autopsy is a medical procedure and it's performed on the remains of a deceased individual in order to determine their cause of death.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, in connection with the work that you did in this case, was an official report done?
Yes.
And does the report have a unique case number assigned to it?
Yes, it does.
Do you have a copy of your report here with you today?
Yes, I do.
It's okay if you refer to it from time to time. Just let us know that's what you're doing, okay?
Okay.
Can you, I guess first let me just show you. Copy. Okay. Any objections for the same purposes that you stated earlier with respect to the report? Okay, let me just have you identified first. Your Honor, for the record, this is marked as State's Exhibit number 318.
Okay.
Do you recognize State's Exhibit 318?
Yes.
What is it?
This is a copy of the autopsy report we prepared for Mrs. Mciver.
Okay. I would tender State's 318 with the same proviso that we've had for other reports that have come in to be made a part of the record but not be brought to the jurors during the objection.
All right. My understanding is that given that proviso, Mr. Harvey, you have no objection. It's admitted.
Okay. I have a copy up here, so we'll leave that one there. But can you tell the jurors what is the unique case number for this case?
Okay, it is 16-1987.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, based on the work you did in this case, did you have an approximate age for Ms. Mciver?
We were told that she was 63 years old.
Okay. Now, can you tell the jurors, when a body is received into the medical examiner's office, what happens?
Okay, they're brought to us either from a hospital in this case or from where they died, and they're put in these large white disaster bags with zippers, and they're brought into our office, they're checked in, and they're stored in a cooler. And then when it's time to do the autopsies, they're brought into a room adjacent to the cooler, and their autopsies are performed in that room.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, in connection with the autopsy, is it documented in any way?
The autopsy is documented in two ways. We prepare this report, and then we also take photographs of the findings, and they kind of complement each other.
Okay. I want to show you a series of exhibits, Your Honor, for identification. They are marked as States 3, 325, 334, 335, 600, and 601.
Okay.
Can you take a look at these exhibits, Dr. Heninger, and indicate for the jurors whether or not you recognize and can identify them?
Yes.
Can you tell the judge and the jury how is it that you can recognize and identify these exhibits?
Okay, many of them have the number 16-1987 or 1987. And then they also, I looked at these in preparation, and they're representatives of a bigger collection, and they're all photos from that collection.
Okay. Can you tell the jurors that these photographs fairly and accurately reflect what you saw during the examination of the body of Diane McIver?
Yes.
Okay, and you can use these photographs to help explain to the jury the nature of her injuries.
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, Ms. Heninger, State's exhibit numbers 324, 325, 334, 335, 600, and 601 into evidence.
Okay, Mr. Harvey, subject to discussions we've had outside the presence of the jury in preserving the objections you made then, anything other you want to get on the record?
Nothing else I want to get on the record. I have a request if we can coincide.
Sure. The videographer and the still camera operator, you are welcome to remain in the courtroom, but I am directing you not to make a still or video recording of any of the images that were just admitted. So while they are being displayed on any of the screens, because they need to be publicly displayed as evidence in this case, that's not confidential, I am directing the media not to make recordings of those. Okay, I'm seeing nods from both the videographer and the still photographer. Thank you, Mr. Harvey.
Okay. This is State's exhibit number 335. And you do have the pointer there in front of you. If you'd like to stand and use the screen, you can, or you can touch the screen in front of you, whatever your preference is, as long as you keep your voice up. Can you explain to the jurors what we see in State's 335?
Okay, this is the first picture that we take at the beginning of the autopsy. You can see that she's in a big white bag. We've unzipped the bag. We've put this little number right here, this little plaque that's got the number. It says 16-1987. So that plaque's going to be with her. That number's going to be with her on everything we do, so we can keep it straight and not mix it up with other cases. And you can see that she's in a hospital gown, and she has an extensive amount of medical intervention, particularly up around her face. There's tubes going into her to help her breathe, and there's some also different accesses for getting fluids into her body. So this is where we begin.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what is the first thing that happens after Mrs. McIver's body was received? And before you answer that question, I'd like to make a correction for the record, Madam Court Reporter. I think I said this photo was 335. It's actually 325. I want to make the record clear about that. Could you tell the jurors what happens once the body is received in this way?
Okay, it's put into this room. The bag is unzipped. We take photographs, and then we begin to examine the body.
Okay. Is there an external examination?
Yes, the examination consists of two parts. The external examination, where we look at the outside surface. We're looking for medical intervention, which may be confused with injuries. We're looking for injuries, and we're looking for evidence of natural disease.
Okay. And then the second part of the examination involves what?
The second part is the internal examination, and we make incisions. We look at the organs inside of the body. We remove them. We dissect them in the standard fashion. And again, we're looking for injuries and diseases. And then there's kind of ancillary things that happen, such as photography, x-rays. We may look at tissue under the microscope if we think it's going to be helpful. And other things, like we may collect blood to be sent to laboratories for testing for substances. There's a variety of other things depending on the case.
Okay. I want to show you a photograph. This is State's Exhibit 335. And can you explain to the jurors what we see in State's 335?
Okay, this is what we call the identification photo, and we basically have a picture of the person, and then we have that number, next to it, and this kind of personalizes the case for us, and so it becomes kind of one of the first, early pictures that we take.
And can you tell the jurors, in this case, when you conducted the external examination of Diane McIver's body, did you find any evidence of injury?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury, where did you see evidence of injury?
Okay, she had 2 holes, one in her back, on the right side of her back, and one in the front on the, it's not the right side, excuse me, the left, let me make sure, the left side of her body. I'm sorry, I mix up rights and lefts sometimes. There's a hole on the left side of her back, and there's a hole on the left side of the front of her body. And these are gunshot wound entrance and exit wounds. So it's one gunshot wound, and it's manifest by 2 holes we can see on the external surface of her body.
Okay. Does your expertise as a forensic pathologist allow you to make determinations with respect to which hole was the entrance hole and which hole was the exit hole?
Yes.
Can you explain that to the jurors?
Okay. Entrance wounds, when just before they go through the skin, the bullet abrades the edge of the skin as it punches through. So you'll see a little tiny abrasion around it. And sometimes if there's at an angle, it might be a little bit bigger on one side or the other. So entrance wounds characteristically have this abrasion. They also tend to be round and regular in appearance and look like they've been kind of punched out. Exit wounds can be more variable, but they tend to look like tears. And they tend to not have abrasions around them unless there's some other reason, like if the body is close to a hard surface and the bullet goes through, it may hit that surface and cause abrasions. Or it can be clothing like belts. It can be if they're laying on the ground. So there are some exit wounds that have abrasions around them for other reasons, but they're not going to be round and regular. So that's how we can tell entrance from exit wounds. There's some cases where it's difficult to tell an entrance from an exit, and sometimes there are things that you can look at that help you. You can look at both of them, and one of them may clearly be an entrance or an exit. Also, if there's an entrance and a bullet at the other end of that, then that's an entrance just by logic. So between the different tools that we have, most of the time we can tell entrances and exits very reliably.
Okay. I'd like to show you State's Exhibit number 334. And is it better oriented this way or this way?
This way is good. This is, you can kind of imagine, this is how she would look if she was standing or sitting up, even though she's actually laying on the table. Here's the autopsy table right here. And here's her head up here. And you can see here on the, just to the left of the midline of her back, there's this injury. And there's a tag below it. The tag has the accession number on it, 16-1987. And it's also a ruler. It's 2 inches. So you can get an idea of the size of this. Okay?
And what is it about the examination of this injury to Diane McIver's body that informs you about whether it's an entrance or an exit?
Okay, if you look right here, there's the hole that the bullet went right through right there. Okay, and this is an abrasion around it. All of this is abrasion. You can see how it's nice and round and regular, and that's very characteristic of an entrance wound. That's how I know that that is an entrance wound.
Okay. I'd like to show you State's Exhibit number 600 for orientation purposes, and then I've got a close-up, okay? And would also state for the record, Judge, only that State 600 and 601 have been altered to some degree by the DA's office to kind of blur out certain aspects of the photograph.
That aren't relevant to what the parties need to discuss.
That's correct.
Okay.
And if you could please just help by orienting jurors to where this injury is on Diane McIver's body.
Okay, this is similar to the previous one, only we're looking at the front of her body, and her head would be up off of the body, her feet would be down. This is her left arm right here. These are her breasts at the top of the picture, and there were some surgical incisions that are here and here. And then you can see the tag and this defect above it.
This is State's Exhibit 601.
Okay, so this is just a close-up of the previous picture. Her head is up and her feet are down. And this is, you can kind of see right here, the incision is at the middle of her abdomen. And this is over to the left side of her abdomen. And you can see this injury is kind of crescent shaped. It's horizontal. It kind of looks like a tear, like the bullets when they come through the skin, they often tear. And there's no abrasion around it. So that is a characteristic of an exit wound. There's also the blue discoloration around it. That's a bruise. And bruises occur around entrance wounds, and they also occur around exit wounds. So they don't help distinguish them one from another. And there's a bruise around this exit wound.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, Dr. Heninger, what is trajectory?
Okay, trajectory is the path that a bullet takes from the muzzle of the gun on to wherever it goes.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, based on the external and the internal examination that you did to Diane McIver's body, do you have an opinion with respect to trajectory?
Yes, I can tell trajectory just in the body. I don't know, I can't tell from an autopsy what other trajectories but within her body, this trajectory is mainly from her back to her front. Okay, it also is slightly from her right to her left. Okay, both of these holes are on the left side of her body, but the one in her back is closer to the midline. It's only 1.25 inches away from the, excuse me, 1.5 inches away from the midline. The one in the front of her body is a little bit more. It's 2 inches and 3/8 from the midline. So it's going slightly from her right to her left. And then it's also going slightly down. It loses about just a little less than 2 inches of elevation as it passes through her body. And then these directions are all based on the body being in what we call standard anatomic position, which is kind of standing up with their hands like this straight. And that helps us keep everything consistent so that we know what we're talking about. But that is not necessarily the exact position the body is in. But that's just the relative trajectory through her body based on a standard anatomic position.
And can you tell the jurors, based on the autopsy that was performed on Diane McIver's body, do you have an opinion with respect to her cause of death?
Her cause of death was a gunshot wound of the back.
Now, can you tell the jurors, during the internal examination, did you determine whether or not the bullet struck any bony process in her body?
Yes, when the bullet first went into her back, it struck part of the backbone, not the central part where the spinal cord is located, but it struck one of the side parts. The spinal column has these large block-like bones, the vertebrae, but they have little wings on them that stick out sideways and also in back. And you can kind of feel the one that sticks out back. It's kind of what you feel, the bumps on your backbone. The ones that stick out sideways are called transverse processes, and the bullet went through one of those. The ribs on the vertebrae, the 12 thoracic vertebrae, they're connected to the vertebrae there too. So it also struck the part where the rib, it was her 11th rib on the left, that it hit that rib right where it articulates or where it touches the spinal column.
Okay. Can you tell the jury, based on what you saw during the internal examination with respect to the damage done to the spinal column, can you tell the jurors, would that have the ability to have altered the trajectory of the bullet and the wound path once it entered her body?
Most of the time, bullets just go pretty much straight through, and often they'll go straight through bones. But when they hit bones, they can sometimes be deflected. So it's possible that it was deflected to a degree when it hit that bone.
Can you tell the jury, what was the wound path?
Okay, then it also went through the very bottom part of the chest cavity. I think when you're first learning anatomy, you think of the diaphragm, which is a muscle which separates the chest from the abdomen. You kind of think of it as flat, but it's actually kind of dome-shaped. And so there's these little recesses, particularly in back, where they're kind of, the chest cavity extends back down further than you might expect. And it went through the very bottom of that chest cavity. It didn't hit her lung. Her lung was above that. And then it went immediately through the diaphragm. And that's a problem because the diaphragm helps move air in and out of the lungs, and it works on negative pressure. So it creates less pressure for air to come in. And so if you rupture it or puncture anywhere in the chest, it interferes with how effective breathing can occur. So it went in through the diaphragm. After that, we had a medical intervention, and so we based a lot of our determination of this pathway on either medical records or on things that weren't there. So, for instance, her left kidney isn't there, the spleen isn't there, the adrenal gland on top of the kidney isn't there. So this pathway damaged those organs. There's also a long suture line in her stomach, which, that would indicate that went through her stomach. That was repaired. And her pancreas had some hemorrhage around it. So that would, there was some injury there. So that's the way I got the pathway. Some of it's based on what I saw. Some of it's based on inferring, what I saw at the autopsy with the medical records.
Okay. Because in connection with the work you did in this case, you also reviewed the medical records for Ms. McIver.
Yes.
Okay. And in this case, you did not recover any projectiles or any bullets from her body?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did you ever receive her clothes from the hospital to look at?
Yes, we received a bag. It was a plastic hospital bag with some of her clothing and some also some jewelry.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, based on the examination you did for Ms. McIver, was she suffering from any other significant natural diseases?
None that were serious or significant.
Now, you also told the jurors that part of what you do, you also collect the blood, sometimes for testing.
Yes.
Was that done in this case?
Yes, it was.
And can you tell the jury, after collecting Ms. McIver's blood, what was done with it?
Okay, this blood was sent to the state crime laboratory for toxicologic testing.
Okay. And that's for the presence or absence of drugs and alcohol?
Yes.
Okay. Did you get a report back from the crime lab?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, I'd like to ask you if you could give the jurors a couple of numbers. The first number I would like for you to give them is if you could tell them how far from the top of Diane McIver's head is the entrance wound to her back.
Okay, it is 20 inches, 20 1/4 inches from the top of her head.
Give it to me one more time.
20 1/4.
And the second number I'd like you to give the jurors is the exit, also from the top of the head.
Okay, the exit is 22 inches from the top of the head.
Even?
Yes.
Now, prior to your testimony here today, have you had a chance to kind of sit down with me and other folks from my office to kind of go over this?
Yes.
Okay. And I have a mannequin here which can be used as a demonstrative exhibit during your testimony, and I'm going to ask you, is there a way you could use this mannequin and this little red probe I have to show the jurors the trajectory through the body of Diane McIver?
Yes, there is.
Okay.
Mr. Harvey, any objections to this process?
Sure.
Okay. Other than to object?
No, if some scientific report or test has been done prior to this time, I was unaware of and haven't been provided with anything with regard to this demonstration, which is, I believe, beyond the canon of an ordinary person. So I object to it being done.
What would the scientific test be, other than, say, practice?
Well, I mean, then what do we need the doctor to do it for? Why do we need a medical examiner to do that if it was something anybody could do? And what does it demonstrate other than what is already demonstrated in the photographs? I don't think it aids anything. I think it was done, it's a specific test or demonstration that a scientific expert has done without us being provided.
Okay. What would you envision getting? I mean, you had the numbers, the 20 and
I
what
had the numbers. A report saying, hey, I got together with them on a Saturday or someplace like Roasters and did a test. And here's what we did. And there is something that isn't the same size, shape, height, or anything as the person that we're talking about. So I do have an objection.
Sure. I've heard it now. Mr. Rucker, anything you want to say in response?
It's just only used as a demonstrative, Judge. And I think it's appropriate. and there's a very relevant purpose for it. I wouldn't want to speak in front of the jurors, but...
No, I think it's relevant. You don't need to address that. I'm working through Mr. Harvey's concern that this isn't something he knew about in advance. I'm just trying to see if it fits sufficiently into the vessel of, well, this was an expert process that was done, and so there should be a report accompanying it. I'm going to allow Dr. Heninger to step down and use the mannequin and the red probe as demonstrative aids based on the data that has been provided to both sides.
Thank you. Okay. And come on, let's get out here in the front.
Has this been pre-marked?
I can mark it as State's Exhibit.
No, I think his question is there already a 20 and 1/4 inch measure?
Yeah, and I can lay that foundation.
Okay.
To expedite his testimony.
That's part of my objection, Judge. Look, they got this mannequin that doesn't represent accurately the person that we've seen. Secondly, it's already been pre-marked.
So the fact that that is not a life-size replica of Ms. Mciver, I've moved past, it hasn't been represented as such. And as I understand, the purpose of this demonstrative is to show the trajectory, the angle. I don't think you need to have a 5'6" or a 10'2" mannequin for that.
And I can lay some foundation.
I guess you can ask some more questions, but it really, if Dr. Heninger in the past did some work to demonstrate X, I'm just working through whether that is an experiment, and that may seem like a heavy word to drape over what you're describing, or you're trying to do, but if it was an experiment that he conducted and there were results, I just don't know what would be reported out other than I measured 20 and 1/4 and I measured 22, and you connect the dots. And I'm going to allow it. I don't know, to Mr. Harvey's point, that it has to be Dr. Heninger who would be doing this, but he is your witness right now, and I think I would allow a witness with those data points to do what you're trying to do right now. It might make sense to have the guy who's relayed to the jury what those data points are to do it. So your objections are noted and preserved. And why don't you please ask Dr. Heninger a little bit more about why the mannequin might already have some marks on it and what they represent.
Right. That's a good question. Why does the mannequin have marks on it, and what do they represent?
Okay, the marks were made when we were discussing, this was, we were preparing for this, and there was as close as I can get, and to where those entrance and exit wound is, and by putting the probe through them, it shows the trajectory. It also is useful if you start moving her around, this gets preserved, this trajectory. So if she's not actually in this perfect situation, you can kind of see, what are possibilities and what aren't as to where this bullet came from. Okay.
Yeah.
So this entrance wound was on her back here, and it's just 20 1/4 inches down. It's 1.5 inches from the midline. Okay, so there's a hole here where we did this, and then the exit wound is on, it's 22 inches down, and it's 2 3/4 inch away from midline. So it's coming a little bit this way. Okay, so this is, I think, a good representation of this trajectory. It's going down a little bit. It's going a little bit towards her left. You can kind of see the perspective, and it's obviously going from her back to her front. So this is, I think, the trajectory, and then if you put her in different positions, you can see how it can change.
Okay. Just give it a chance to see. Okay. And so you said to the jurors that this is, the trajectory is downward if you look at the body in an anatomical position, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But, yeah.
And
She been?
And I, again, I have an objection.
Okay.
Can we approach?
Sure. So, in looking at this demonstrative exhibit, Dr. Heninger, we can't put it in a seated position, but what I'd like to ask you is hypothetically, would the trajectory change if, say, the mannequin were, reclined back or in a seated position like
Yes,
this?
you can kind of see that just a little bit. If the seat is like really far forward, it'd be like this. If the seat is further back, it changes. And it can change several inches. If the seat's reclined quite a bit, like this, it can be somewhat different. So any of these are consistent with that wound, depending on where that seat is, which I can't tell from an autopsy where the seat was.
If hypothetically the mannequin were reclined back far enough, would the trajectory change such that it would actually be upwards slightly?
Yes.
Okay.
And she can also be sitting higher or lower in the seat too, so that, this kind of a movement, she's sitting higher and slouched down, it doesn't change where it's at. It doesn't change the angle, but it changes where the muzzle of the gun was by a few inches.
And based on what you understand about the trajectory, the muzzle of the gun, given that this is the entry wound, would be where along this line?
It's back here.
Now we're talking about pure speculation, in which I don't know that he's qualified to testify to.
So I agree in part. I think you need to focus the question more. There has been testimony, I think this person is qualified to testify about a line. Where on the line?
Right. I think that's where I was going.
Okay, well, let's just get him there, and you may need to lead a little bit, but I'll let you do that.
Okay.
So that he's not speculating.
Okay. Like for instance, let me ask you this, Dr. Heninger. Can you say this? The injuries to Ms. McIver's body, is it consistent with the muzzle of the gun being here?
No,
It's not.
it's not consistent.
Okay. Is it consistent with the muzzle of the gun being here?
No, unless she's turned, but if it's not, she's not turned.
Okay. Is it consistent with the muzzle of the gun being back here along this line?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Heninger, can you tell the jurors, as part of the external examination, were you able to determine a height and weight for Diane McIver?
Yes.
What was it?
She was 67.5 inches, or 5'7.5" inches, and she weighed 163 pounds.
Now, can you tell the jury, when you examined her body, how close did the wound path come to Diane McIver's heart?
A few inches. You can kind of see where that, from the pictures, where that exit wound is. And some people, if they're thin enough, they can actually feel where their heart beats when it kind of, as it beats the end of the heart, will kind of touch the chest wall. And that's usually down below the nipple in a male, and maybe 1 or 2 rib spaces down. That's where the end of the heart is. So you can kind of trace out where your heart is right here. And this wound is, maybe this far down below that.
Now, can you tell the jurors, as part of the opinion that you formed regarding the entry wound to Diane McIver's body, can you tell the jurors, in your report, did you have or form an opinion with respect to the entrance wound and its regularity or irregularity?
Okay, this wound is fairly regular. The hole is fairly round, and the abrasion is fairly round, even though there's more of it up high. So I thought this wound was not very irregular. Okay, it was fairly regular.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, did you have an opinion at the time that you looked at the entrance wound to Miss McIver's back, whether or not a bullet had actually passed through some object before it struck her back?
Yes, this is a very important question that comes up, and when bullets go through objects, like particularly, like you can imagine some of this desks or furniture here, the bullets get flattened out, they can tumble, and when they hit the body, they make large irregular wounds. So when I'm looking at a wound, I'm always thinking about, was there an intermediate target? Is this wound irregular enough to suggest that? Okay, and in this case, just looking at the body without looking at everything else, it kind of at least suggested to me that the bullet may not have gone through another object. Okay, and as you can imagine, that if this bullet didn't go through the car seat, but there's a hole in the car seat, that now becomes two gunshot wounds, which changes this whole situation. But there's also, this is not 100%, and sometimes, depending on what the bullet goes through, if it doesn't hit anything really hard, or if it starts to wobble, it can still kind of hit in pretty straight, even though it's kind of wobbling, just by luck. So there's, I was kind of concerned about this, and particularly early on in this, that we needed to look real carefully, not just me, but people looking at the car, to look real carefully at the car about, how many times was the gun fired in the car. And that was, kind of what I was thinking.
Okay. And I want to show you an item that's been removed from State's Exhibit number 386. It's already been entered in the evidence, Judge. And ask you, when you look at this item, first of all, what is it?
This looks like a medium caliber bullet, and it's got a copper jacket on it. It covers the hand. It's kind of flat on top, and it doesn't cover the base. And it has some little scrapes on it that twist to the right.
And when you kind of describe for the jurors sometimes bullets that appear to be flattened, is this an example of one?
No, this bullet looks like it has not been deformed.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Heninger. I believe that's all my questions, Judge.
Charlie?
Dr. Heninger, how are you this afternoon? How you doing?
Great.
Good. I understand that you were presented with Ms. McIver for the purposes of autopsy, correct?
That is correct.
And you were presented with Ms. McIver after a lot of medical intervention that occurred prior to you receiving her for autopsy.
That's correct.
And the autopsy, among other things, determines whether there are, well, you do an external investigation and an internal investigation, correct?
That's correct.
there's no question but that on your external examination, there were 2 holes. You said, and you used the word holes, 2 holes.
Yes,
One in the back and one in the front, correct?
that's correct.
And based upon your years of experience, it was clear to you that it was an entrance wound and exit wound from a bullet, from the trajectory of a bullet, correct?
That's correct.
There wasn't anything particularly complex or sophisticated or unknown about that, correct?
Yes, this is a very straightforward gunshot wound case at
And
autopsy.
one of the things that you did in order to help you with your, not necessarily external investigation, but your internal investigation, was also use the medical records from the extensive medical intervention that had gone on beforehand, correct?
Yes,
You knew that Ms. Mciver had presented to Emory University, the emergency room, correct?
that is correct.
Because that's where you got the medical records from, and you reviewed those.
Yes,
You knew that she was in the emergency room in Emory University Hospital over in DeKalb County, correct?
that's correct.
And when she presented at Emory, she presented with the bullet wound, correct?
Yes,
And in this kind of wound, this particular wound, there was done a lot of external bleeding from your review of the medical records.
yeah, I don't honestly recall that, but
Okay.
yes.
There was a lot of internal bleeding, correct?
We had quite a bit in, that we measured, but and with surgery, they probably took even more out. So I'm sure that, and just knowing where this went, you know, the damage and the organs that it damaged, those organs have abundant blood supply. So I'm sure there was a lot of bleeding.
And there was, and when there is a lot of bleeding, if it's internal bleeding, there is pressure internally, correct?
It can start to build up, although the abdomen can kind of also expand. So, yeah.
And one of the things that happens when there is bleeding is that there are, the brain doesn't get as much blood, correct?
Yes, what happens is that the body is designed to try and shunt blood away from the less vital organs and shunt it towards the brain and the heart. And so there is a period of time where people are bleeding, but they're still having preservation of blood to their brain and their heart, but it's starting to be shunted away from particularly internal organs. So there's this mechanism that so a person can be injured and bleeding to death, but they can still function for some short or long period of time. It's extremely variable from different people.
Okay. And I'll get back to the bleeding and blood to the brain in a second. Solely from the external examination, where you see an entrance wound, you can tell an entrance wound, correct?
Yes,
That entrance wound was in the back, correct?
yes,
And you didn't see what's called stippling around it, correct?
that's correct.
So that you can assume then that the gun was not pressed up against the person's back, correct?
Yes, or that there was something, a target or something in between it.
Okay.
But yes,
And you had also understood in this particular case, because you told us that there was a seat in between where Miss Mciver was seated, correct?
yes,
Not standing in an anatomical position, correct?
we were told she was sitting in a car.
All right, and that there is an entrance wound on the back of a seat, correct?
I'd say I would, because
There's an entrance hole on the
Yeah,
back of a seat,
it's,
correct?
some of these features do get preserved in inanimate objects, so you're tempted to say, but I don't like to go that far. So I would say just a hole in the seat.
Okay, no, that's what I did.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
hole in the seat,
Mhm.
and an entrance hole in the back seat, and an exit hole in the front seat, correct?
Yes, 2 holes. whichever, I mean,
Right.
yeah.
And we know that Ms. McIver was not in an anatomical standing up position in the front seat of the vehicle, correct?
She wouldn't fit.
Okay, well.
Yeah, I mean, this car isn't tall enough, so.
All right, good, I'm with you on that. But there are a number of, an infinite, almost, number of ways one can be seated in a seat, correct?
I'd say a large number.
A large number. And a large number that we generally can't define without the seat, correct? And that you can't tell what position Ms. McIver may have been in the front seat, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So when we looked at the anatomical model, we know it's not standing up. We don't know the angle at which the seat was, correct?
That's correct.
We don't know the reclining angle, correct?
Yes.
We don't know the actual position that Ms. McIver may have been in at the time the projectile went through the seat, correct?
She could be sitting a little bit one way or the other, and leaning forward or back. There's some variability.
Yeah, so there's a lot of variability within a confined space.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you say that the weapon had to be along the trajectory, it had to be along the trajectory from the back seat through the front, correct?
Yes.
And we can tell a trajectory through the back seat to the front the same way you did with the model, correct? With a rod.
If you have the seat, you can look at the holes in the seat and do similar thing. Yeah.
Okay. So we can understand at least a little bit better, not necessarily the path through the body, but the path through the seat is going to inform the path through the body.
I think of them as two separate things that can be put together.
Sure.
But I mean, I'm not sure one influences the other. I mean, they're independent. There's a hole where this hole is in her seat doesn't change where the hole is in her back. They're where they're at, and then you can look at them and conclude from them.
And try to put it together.
Yes.
Correct? But you're not telling us the gun or the weapon or the muzzle had to be in any particular kind of position in order to inflict the wound that you saw, correct? That's not what you're here to tell us.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think of it as like a probability box. I mean, there's a box back there that it's likely it was in, and maybe there's some gray areas around that, and then there's a lot of places that it definitely wasn't.
Yeah, sure, when Mr. Rucker said, well, it can't be over here on the side, well, I mean, that's...
Yeah, that's way outside the
That's
probability
fake
box.
news there.
Yeah.
We know that. That can't be, that couldn't have happened. So there is a certain perimeter, if I can use that word, in which the muzzle had to be, correct?
Yes.
But you're not telling us anything about where that is or how it happened or anything of that nature, correct? Just the wound path.
The wound path's what I saw, and then this wherever this box is can kind of be inferred from that, but there's some variables in it too.
Well, there are a ton of variables.
Mm-hmm.
Seat height, seat, slouching forward, seat angle. We can name a lot of those variables.
Yeah,
right?
and they kind of make the box a little bit bigger, but they don't make it infinitely big.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Can't be infinite.
Yeah.
In an enclosed car,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We talked about her being presented with a gunshot wound. When she got presented with a gunshot wound, tell us what shock is.
Shock it's kind of a medical term that it describes a situation where you're basically not getting enough blood to the organs, and it can happen from blood loss, or can happen from things that cause the blood vessels to expand. And it can also, there can be emotional facets to it. But it's kind of something that happens frequently, and it's usually treated with fluids. So, and it's very common in injuries. And so, people that are shot through these vital organs are probably going to go into shock, invariably, I think.
Well, we've got essentially a through and through. The projectile is not inside the body, correct?
That's correct.
And the projectile goes through the body. She's presented, and the first thing they want to do, at Emory is to stop the bleeding, right?
Yes.
Okay. And if someone goes into shock, and, for example, she's bleeding out, you stop the bleeding. Does that help? If someone that goes into shock, can they become unconscious?
Oh, yes.
And if you stop the bleeding and infuse the organs, can they become conscious again?
I think so, yes.
Okay. And if one is going into shock, becomes unconscious, can come out, the bleeding is stopped at least temporarily, can they still be able to think and talk and make statements and answer questions?
They probably, yes. I mean, I don't know her specific, from an autopsy, I can't tell her specific situation. I mean, I can get it secondhand, but yes.
Okay. Well, in your review of the medical records, you understood that the first object at Emory was to stop the bleeding, to infuse the body with blood, correct?
Well, yeah, those kind of are two things, but they're both the same goal. It's to fill the vasculature up with blood again, fluids to,
And that you understood that for at least a brief period, Ms. McIver regained consciousness and answered questions, correct?
Yes, that was what was reflected.
Okay. And that is not something that would be impossible or unusual because of the medical intervention that happened at Emory, correct?
Yes, I mean, this is kind of outside where I usually
That's a fair
do.
observation.
But, I mean, that seems logical.
Okay. Well, she would still be able to think and speak and feel for an unknown period of time, correct?
Yeah, an unknown short period of time, yes.
Yes. Yes. And bottom line here is we have a single bullet wound, correct? Correct?
Yes.
Without stippling, correct?
Yes.
Going through an intermediate body, correct?
The seat, yes.
With the potential for it to either go through or hit something else, or unknown potentials going through the seat, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Going into the body from behind, correct?
Yes.
And coming out in the front, correct?
Yes.
And so the cause of death, without any question, is a single bullet shot wound, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have, thank you.
Mr. Robert, any redirect? No, sir. Questions from the jurors for Dr. Heninger?
We have one more.
Okay. Take your time. Allegedly. Did you receive the clothing that Ms. McIver was wearing when she was a passenger in that car?
We received a bag from the hospital that was labeled as her clothing, and I'm presuming that that was the clothing that she was wearing.
Did you examine the clothing for any defects in connection with the injuries that you observed?
We did, and we didn't write down whether we saw them or not. So I don't know for sure. I don't have it in my report, and I don't have pictures of it, and I don't have it in my memory. So I can't, I mean, I think if we'd seen no
I don't
holes.
want you to speculate.
Okay, you're right.
It's just,
I'll stop
your
right
answer
there.
is you don't recall whether any defects were observed in any of Ms. McIver's clothing that was provided to you.
That is correct.
Okay. You described a series of organs that had been removed from Ms. McIver before you received the body. Were those organs in the path that is mapped out by the trajectory you demonstrated?
That's a very good question, and yes, they are.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Just get handed something I missed.
Sure. The question was, were the organs that were removed during the surgical procedures in an effort to save Ms. McIver's life, kidney, spleen, etc., were those in the path that is mapped out by the trajectory that was demonstrated to the jury? Answer, good question, was what was first said, and then yes. Mr. Rucker, any follow-up based on those two questions?
Yes, sir, just one. Just 1 second, Judge,
Okay.
please. I'd like to show you an exhibit. It states exhibit number 523. And can you take a look at 523 and tell the jurors whether or not you recognize and identify it?
Okay, this is a obviously a brown bag with evidence tape. It has a sticker on it that our office generates with these. It's technology for addressing envelopes. Okay, and it's got Miss McIver's name on it. It's got the accession number, and then written in the handwriting of one of my technicians is her name, accession number, the date, some other information, and then it says black and blue plaid skirt, cut, white bra, cut. So presumably those are some of the items of clothing that we were given and put in this bag and then sent to either the police or I think it's got the police numbers here on it, so we sent it to the police.
Okay. And can you tell the jury, if you look on page 2 of 7 of your report,
Okay.
in the section marked presentation, clothing, and personal effects, can you tell the jurors items number 4 and 5, are they consistent with what is contained in States 523, the skirt and the bra?
Yes.
Okay. And in your report, is there any listing of a shirt received from the hospital?
There's no listing on this, in my list in my report, of a shirt or a blouse or something that would be worn above the waist.
Okay. And there's no reflection of a shirt also listed on the bag?
That is correct.
Okay. I would tender 523 in the evidence, Judge, and I'm not going to ask the doctor to open the bag or display any of the contents.
Okay. Mr. Harvey, any objection to 523?
Well, yes, it doesn't have any relevance to this particular point. So is it going to go out? Are we going to open it? I don't see it as any probative value, and any probative value would be outweighed by prejudicial value under 403.
In light of the testimony that we received from Dr. Heninger, what's the probative value of 523?
Shows a completeness, Judge, and I think it ties up a chain regarding testimony we had from hospital personnel with respect to the shirt and the items that were actually sent from the hospital to the medical examiner's office.
Okay, we can take that up outside the presence of the jury, because I'm not remembering exactly the hospital piece of that. But so I will table for now a discussion of whether 523 is coming in. Anything else for Dr. Heninger?
No, sir.
Mr. Harvey, any follow-up questions?
No,
Dr. Heninger, thank you for your time. You can leave paperwork, make sure you take that with you, but not other exhibits. Mr. Rucker, next witness.
Before I make an announcement, Judge, I would like to tender into evidence for purposes of the record, State's Exhibit 602, 603, and 604.
All right. Any objection to 602, 03, or 04, Mr. Harvey?
Other than the ordinary.
They're being made part of the record. It sounds like that's where they'll stay.
That's correct. They are transcripts from the jail calls from yesterday. I can make the record a little bit more complete. 602 is the jail call from Dixie Martin, the defendant's sister. 603 is a transcript of the jail call with Ann Schwall. And 604 is a transcript of the jail call with John Spike McIver.
Got it. Those are admitted and made part of the record.
All right. And with that announcement, Judge, at this time, the state of Georgia would rest this case.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Rucker. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our afternoon break now. This break will be a little longer than usual as well, because we have reached the point where the attorneys and I need to work through a few things. We will get you back in here to either say the case is over, or the defense isn't presenting something, or for the defense to call witnesses if that's what the defense wants to do. Reminder, you've heard it many times, but it bears repeating. It may be that I bring you back out here and what you hear is that the defense rests. That's fine, because Mr. McIver has no burden whatsoever in this case. It's solely on the state, and the state has presented its case in chief at this point. That does not mean you should go back there and start deliberating. We're not there yet. You'll know when that starts, because I'll be waking you up from having given you the jury charge. And then you'll go back to the jury room, you get all the exhibits, and you'll begin your deliberations. I need to talk with the lawyers, figure some things out. We'll get you back out here. I know we're ending at 5, but we will make good use of your time today and see where we're going next. Please don't talk about the case. Just go with Deputy Murphy, and we'll see you soon.
All rise for the jurors. Please be seated.
It is about 3:33 according to the official gold-plated clock on the wall. At 2:22 on that same clock, Mr. McIver excused himself from the proceedings. I want to get that on the record. He's welcome to come back whenever, but I just...
The door's locked. So,
I just got the cavalry.
okay.
Okay. He's stuck on the inside?
No, it's open now, Judge.
I just
Okay.
want to knock on the door while Dr. Heninger is testifying.
Got it. Well, I want to get all this on the record. At 2:22, according to the clock on the wall to my left, Mr. McIver quietly stepped up and left the courtroom, went to the room that has been made available for the defense team. Now at, we'll call it 3:34, he has returned, so he was not present for the vast majority of the direct examination of Dr. Heninger, none of the cross-examination, none of the redirect, and none of what flowed from the 2 juror questions. Mr. McIver, of course, is free to leave court at any time, but I don't want the transcript to, the record to miss out on that development. I bring it up not because I'm critical of it in any way, I just think it's important that the record reflect that. I had brought Mr. Harvey and Ms. Convery up for a sidebar before we began Dr. Heninger's testimony to make sure that Mr. McIver was aware that he could step outside if he felt that that was the right thing for him to do. Mr. Harvey said that he and the team had already discussed with Mr. McIver how it might be difficult to sit through Dr. Heninger's testimony. And it was clear to me that Mr. McIver elected his own free will to step outside during what turned out to be the bulk of Dr. Heninger's testimony. Mr. Harvey, anything you want to get on the record in connection with how all that played out?
No, sir, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Rucker, anything? No. All right, Mr. McGuire, thank you for stepping out in the quiet way that you did. I'm sorry that was difficult. I'm going to give you all a break for a little bit. When we get back, we need to talk about motions for directed verdict. As I previewed, what I'd like to do is hear argument on and ideally rule on any motion for directed verdict as to counts 1 through 4. I will deem as timely made the motion for directed verdict as to counts 5, 6, and 7, the influencing witnesses counts. But I'm going to defer our discussion on that until we release the jurors for the day, then we can have argument on counts 5, 6, and 7. And that's all with an eye to having the defense, should it choose to call witnesses, begin that presentation, assuming that none of it has to do with counts 5, 6, and 7, at least none of what will happen today. The other thing I want to hear from the defense on when we come back from our 4 to 5 minute break is when I should have a conversation with Mr. McGuire about whether he wants to testify. I'm happy deferring that until you reach near the close of your presentation, but you all, the attorneys, are in the best position to know whether it makes sense to do it after I rule on the motion for directed verdict, right after it, or if it's something that it's appropriate to defer for a day or two. So we'll touch on that when we get back as well. Let's be back in position in about 5 minutes, please.